Wow, this is a great old house.
Thanks. Do you want to buy it?
I'm not the property-owning type. No, I prefer my life to fit in hand luggage.
That why you're back? To flog it?
Yep.
Make a nice second home for some banker wankers?
Look, Andy, if you want it, why don't you just make me an offer?
Because sadly, I'm still prey to the economic forces that threw the peasant classes off the land.
Hello and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about feature films based on comic strips and comic books that people have stopped talking about. This week we're going to be talking about Tamara Drewe from 2010. I'm your host Kumar, my co-host is Jordan.
Hello.
Tamara Drewe was by Posy Simmonds. It came out, I think, in 2007. It was serialized on the Guardian website. One page a week or something. And it's still on the Guardian website, but it's a very blurry... The JPEGs are really blurry for some reason. They're not nice, fun to read.
Okay.
And also they are... It's been heavily revised for the book version.
I see. I read... Yep, sorry, go on.
I only read a few pages of it, and I just did a side-by-side comparison, and there were a lot of differences in the few pages I read, like just the way the panels were arranged on the page and the text. So it's not just, there's a lot of like text passages, prose passages.
Yes.
So those have been all kind of rewritten and everything. So I'm sure it must be quite different the whole way through.
I see. Well, I only read the book which you gave to me, which was a trade paperback published in 2009.
Right.
First published in 2007.
Right.
And it says, yes, before that, published in cartoon strip form in The Guardian.
Right.
And I think has come out to coincide with the film because it has a sticker on the front that says, now a major film.
Yes, it does have a sticker on the front, and I bought it from one of those like discount pop-up bookshops for like $5 or $10 or something.
That's a good find.
It is a good find, and it's hard to get now. I don't see them in the pop-up shops anymore, and I looked online, and it's like a little bit... You have to dig a little bit to find it. There's certainly... I did not find any... Other than the Guardian version, there's no high-res ebook version of it.
No kidding.
That I could find anywhere. So, so that's what we've got. I don't think it's like... I think you could probably buy it, but I think it's maybe out of print. So maybe you got to go to eBay or something. I'm not sure if you really are looking for it.
If you're inspired to really read Tamara Drewe after the sparkling conversation that we're about to have about it.
Yeah, or before. I mean, some people might be reading ahead for next week's episode. Okay, so it's there's a lot of plot because there's so much prose in there. Posy Simmonds really manages to fit a lot of stuff into this book that's probably like 120 pages or something, or 100 pages.
Right.
Something
it's
like
it's quite there is quite a lot of text, isn't there?
Yeah.
The pages aren't numbered, but yeah, it's there's quite a few pages and quite a lot of words. It's long.
Yeah. So
I managed to read it in one sitting.
Yes.
But it probably took me more than an hour.
Yeah, so we've already violated one of the rules of the show, which was to not have to read the whole thing. But it is a whole self-contained little book, so it's hard to not sit down and read it the whole way through. So it's about this a writer's retreat, it's a farm that's being used as a writer's retreat in the country not too far outside of London. And there are all these writers, of course, who come there for short stays or whatever. They're all writing different kind of books. It's run by this woman, Beth, and her husband is Alan, is a mystery writer, and he is he's having all sorts of affairs on the side. She knows about them. They have a quote-unquote open relationship. She's aware of his dalliances, but the assumption is always that they're not serious. They're not supposed to get serious. Sometimes they do get serious. There is an explosion. They make up, and then they move on. And he has, again, supposedly casual relationships, which is kind of allowed in their relationship. She allows him to do this so that he has his creative freedom. Now, she runs everything. So she runs everything for the writers. She makes sure that they're in the headspace that they want to be in by managing the noise or whatever, all various things, providing meals. She also takes care of Alan, makes sure he's not interrupted while he's writing.
His name's Nicholas, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Who's Alan?
I'm not sure.
Did they call him Alan in the movie? Why am I saying Nicholas? I don't know.
I'm pretty sure he's Nicholas in both, but that's okay.
Wow, what a brain fart. Okay. So, so the cattle... Oh, there's also a farmhand.
Yes.
Who is Andy?
Andy.
Okay.
That's right.
The handsome farmhand. And,
Yes.
okay, and then there's this catalyst which happens, which is this girl named Tamara Drewe, who used to live in the village, moves back to take over her mother's house. Her mother's passed away, and now I'm starting to already get some plot points confused with the movie because they're actually pretty close.
Very similar.
So some things start to melt into others, and there are differences, and so I might get a few of these tidbits wrong. So she takes over her mother's house. It used to be Andy's ancestral home, but they lost it a long time ago, whatever. So she comes back into town. She's had a nose job. She's very pretty, but she's also a writer. So she writes a column for some newspaper, like a weekly sell. I don't know what you call those columns where you talk about yourself.
It's like a gossip column, isn't it? It's
not really gossip, though. She's really just writing about herself and things that are happening in her life. And immediately, because of her youth and attractiveness, it kind of triggers a bunch of events. So Andy...
Hijinks ensue.
Some hijinks, very well. So Andy is attracted to her, but she ends up hooking up with a drummer from her band on one of her visits to London, because they just go back and forth all the time. She meets his drummer, and she ends up in a relationship with him. They break up. She ends up having an affair with Nicholas.
Yes.
And meanwhile, I think she ends up in a relationship because she's on the rebound after breaking up with Ben, the drummer. And I can't remember if that's exactly how it works in the comic, but that's how it worked in the movie. It's very clear in the movie that she's on the rebound from this.
Very clear. Yeah, that's one of the differences between the comic and the movie.
Okay, so I've already described it wrong.
No, you're doing fine. It's fine. This synopsis is perfectly adequate.
Okay, and the other thing that's important is that there are these super bored kids hanging around in town. They usually hang out in the old bus stop, which isn't even in use anymore, but there's a bus shelter. And they just hang out there, and it's mainly these two teenage girls who are like 14, 15 in there. Yes. One of them has a huge celebrity crush on Ben. And so since Ben starts coming to this podunk nothing village, she starts freaking out. And when Tamara and Ben go back to London, these girls start sneaking into her house and like trying on her clothes and smelling her perfumes. And they even get into her email and send out, this phony email that seems like it's come from Tamara just to mess with them, essentially. And she has all these sex...
And that kicks off more hijinks.
Yes, and she has all these kind of sex fantasies about losing her virginity to Ben. But she's also on a self-destruct course because she's like sniffing like cans.
Yeah, we call that huffing.
Huffing, right. Huffing. And she's drinking the booze that they find in the house, that kind of stuff. The other girl is like, whoa, this is getting out of hand. She doesn't want to be involved. But Jody is the one that's really... She's getting in over her head. But she just hates life in this village so much. And she has such big dreams. And everything comes to a huge tragic head in the last 10, 15 pages with multiple deaths, which we might spoil. Some of them very tragic. Some of them you're like, well, okay, that guy's gone, and he kind of had it coming to him, or whatever, you know. And I don't know if we need to really describe the plot more than that.
Well, you just described it precisely.
Yes, but
well,
okay, yes.
Exactly. No,
so,
I mean that's close. I mean, yes. No, that's good. That's pretty much the plot.
Yeah, except for the spoilery stuff, which I think we'll probably talk about later in the show.
I think I think
including what happens, you know, with Tamara in the end and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So I'd also like to talk just very quickly about the plot in perhaps more broad strokes.
Okay.
So I think I saw it described online as a comedy of manners.
Okay.
So the part of what drives the story and the interesting interactions between the characters is their kind of like social expectations, the way they behave, and the kind of sticky, funny situations that they get into. And there's some social critique in there. It's not particularly pronounced, but as you were talking about, it's this kind of podunk town,
right?
But it's one that's full of rich people, that are full of the very rich and the very poor.
Yes.
So the town is depressed, and Andy and his kind of people like him have kind of sold up their old farmhouses and no longer own the property that their grandparents owned. And it's all been bought by rich bankers and so on from London. Tamara Drewe is a scion of one of those families, the rich families, and Andy is a child of the poorer families. And then you have this writers' retreat as well, which is where the writers are relatively well-to-do, and the owner of the farm, Beth and Nicholas, they're also quite well-to-do. And you contrast that.
Yeah, he's a rich mystery. He's written like 20 of these mystery novels that are huge hits, so they're loaded. Yeah.
Yes. And on the other hand, you have kind of like the town's people who are quite a bit poorer, quite resentful of the rich people. Yeah. And as I said, doing kind of very aware of the lack of opportunity, the lack of future, and kind of leading mildly self-destructive lives with the breaking and entering and the doing of drugs and so on. It's not a big secret that this comic is kind of like a retelling of a Thomas Hardy novel.
Yeah, Far From the Madding Crowd.
Far From the Madding Crowd.
Yeah. And
that's made quite explicitly clear in the film, where Glenn, the American academic, is an academic of Thomas Hardy.
Yeah, so they've changed that. He's not doing a Hardy. He's not.
No, in the book he's doing Proust or some French.
Yeah, something different. Yeah, not Hardy. But they do mention Far From the Madding Crowd in the newspaper.
It's the very first. Yeah, it's the very first thing you see once the film begins. Yeah,
and the end of the comic. It's in the comic too, isn't it?
Yes, it definitely is mentioned in the comic. I think in a dialogue, in a word balloon.
Yeah, well, this is skipping many weeks ahead, maybe a year ahead. But Posy Simmonds did another comic called Gemma Bovary, which was based on Madame Bovary,
right?
Which was also made into a movie, also starring Gemma Arterton in the lead role. So
you're kidding?
No, so same actress, both Posy Simmonds adaptations, and both of them are based on very loosely structured around classic novels.
Wow, that's really interesting. Well, I look forward to doing that a few years down the track.
Yeah. Oh, it could be a few weeks or a few years. I don't know, but we'll get to it eventually. But yeah, so
these interesting of these characters and the kind of sticky situations that they get into and their different responses to them. As you say, primarily concerned with kind of infidelity and illicit relationships. And at the center of it all, Tamara Drewe, who the comic is named after. Although she's a bit of a mysterious character, I think, throughout a lot of the comic. We're not really privy, except through her column and a couple of, I think, of the conversation. Does she get an inner monologue? Because a lot of the characters, a lot of those big things of text.
We mostly get her column, yeah.
Her column is how we're privy to her thoughts.
Yeah.
Otherwise, kind of mysterious.
I feel like the movie actually got her a bit more, because there's a scene in the movie where she's when she first arrives in town, she checks into an inn for the first night, and there's a scene where she's in the bathtub and she's examining her nose in a hand mirror while she's in the tub, and then she looks at it on the wall mirror so she can see it in profile. So she's had this nose job. It's a major part of the plot of her coming back. So we get a moment like that, and there's also a moment where somebody she breaks up with Ben, comes back to town, and she's hoping to hook up with Andy, and she comes to the pub and she looks through the window and she sees Andy making out or even having sex with the waitress. And then she goes back to her car and she has a complete breakdown. She breaks down into tears, and we never get a moment like that in the comic.
No, and I think that's a weakness of the film,
right?
Or at least that's an element of the film that I didn't like. So we've got opposite perspectives on that there.
Well, I'm not saying it's necessarily a good thing. I'm saying we get more insight into her. Absolutely. We get more of her backstory. There's much more of an effort to explain why she does what she does. Right. I think in the comic, it's almost like she's a catalyst as much as a person, because she's dropped into this funny environment and it kicks off all of these kind of coruscating events, like that occur, and she's very much a participant in them. Yeah. But also she's like a Mentos dropped into a bottle of Diet Coke. Yeah.
She's opaque, and yet she causes all this turmoil.
Because if you think about the two people that die, would have died even if she hadn't been in it. I think so.
That's interesting. Well, she doesn't murder them.
No, she doesn't murder them. But even if it had been like if Nick had an affair with somebody else, or that confrontation in the cow paddock would have happened, I think. Anyway, and Jodie was more obsessed with Ben than Tamara. You know what I mean? Like, she's not. Her personality doesn't affect those deaths, I guess is the way I would put it.
Yes, I see what you're saying. I kind of see those. I kind of see those deaths as occurring as the end result of the absurd spiraling.
That's true.
Sequence of events that occur because of her arrival. In the village.
Yeah.
But as you say, no one is fundamentally changed through interaction with her.
Right.
Are they? No one undergoes plot development.
No, except in the final last page, like the last 2 pages, there's a change. But I also question the term comedy of manners, because I'm not sure how much comedy there is in here.
I found it quite funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It occurs in a kind of fantasy land. This farm with all these writers. It's really kind of a perfect place. They talk about a well-known poet. Can you name a poet other than Maya Angelou? Like, what is a well-known poet? Do any exist in our universe? I don't think they do. I think this is a weird kind of.
It's a writer's retreat. Of course they're going to know about poets.
Well, okay, so the people at the retreat know about the poets, but the way she says he's a well-known poet sounds like he's known to general society, which I think there are very few. I think there are poets, tons of poets in the world. I don't know if any of them are well-known.
We're just completely exposing our Philistine kind of like preoccupations here.
Maybe.
You're saying like absolute boomers.
The way I think the comedy works is the dramatic irony. Whenever dramatic irony occurs, it's handled really well, and I think the comics are really perfect for that. I think something about visually showing that someone is in another room and able to overhear a conversation, or that kind of stuff, it works so well, and Simmonds is so good at staging these scenes and those kinds of moments where people.
That's good. Because that was going to be one of my questions for you, Kumar. Right. Like, why is this a comic
instead of a novel?
Yeah, instead of a novel.
Well, my first thing is always any artist just has a medium that they feel connected to, or they want to work in for whatever reason. It's just,
of course, but you're also saying that this is a really good medium for.
Yeah.
I think I'm pretty happy with comedy of manners.
Yeah.
I think comedy of manners tend to be satirical and poke fun at kind of social conventions.
Yeah.
And they tend to be realistic and not, but also
that's true. It's very wry.
I'm really happy with the term, and I think you were onto something there when you said that you can show situations in an interesting way. You can show a person listening to a conversation, and they make some efforts to do that in the movie, and it always felt a bit forced.
Yeah, and then
like he's on the toilet listening to them talk, and they had to show their shadows against the frosted glass.
Right.
It's like, where's the light here? Why are there shadows so clear on this frosted glass? Every now and again, the film would occasionally indulge in people in inner monologues and strange.
Sometimes you get voiceover, and sometimes at one moment Beth speaks directly to the camera.
Right. Yes. And another time they have like intrusive kind of like imagery. Like that person will be imagining a thing and it appears, but it happens so infrequently. It's not at all kind of like a consistent motif in the film. It felt odd, and I think it's happening because it's trying to recreate elements of the comic.
This is the thing. In the comic, you get on each page you'll get like maybe 6 panels. It's not consistently, but you might get like 6 panels and then a wall of prose, like a huge paragraph of. Sometimes it's something somebody's typed on a typewriter, or not necessarily, but it is a kind of you get a first person paragraph from that person, and you get their perspective on what they just saw or experienced or something like that.
I quite liked it. Normally I wouldn't read, if I picked up a comic like this at the library or something like that, I would instantly put it down, because I'm not interested in reading great big slabs of text in a comic book usually. It's just not what I want.
You know what?
But I had to read this one, obviously, as preparation for the podcast, and I found that I quite liked it, and I see what you mean, because you can get these different perspectives in a way that you wouldn't get just with just a novel or with a standard kind of like 9-box page of a comic page with just dialogue and the text in the boxes, whatever that's called. I quite actually liked it. I really warmed to it. So,
what I was going to say was her other book, Gemma Bovary, also has the same format. So
I can imagine so.
You got text and comics, so that's the way she's used to working. But also, I've noticed another one we're going to be doing at some stage, Phoebe Gluckner's Diary of a Teenage Girl, is almost the same thing. It's got alternating pages of text and comics, like alternating sequences.
Oh, God,
I
already hate the idea of reading. But no, I'm trying to be better.
So anyway, so I think it's interesting too, because the other reason I resist calling it a comedy is it is a comedy. It's the people's hypocrisy, or not. That's not the word. People's contradictions. Well, I think Nicholas is definitely hypocritical. And in the comic,
tragic events happen, don't they? I mean, it's a happy ending, really.
Yes, but there's a moment that I really loved where Beth is thinking to herself. She's out in the field, and she's like, I love taking care of the writers. I love making sure that they're comfortable and that they're producing as much as they can in the best situation they can. And then literally 3 pages later, something's happened, and she's like, these writers depress me. And their self-obsessions and all this stuff. And it's really, so much of the book is about people who are lying to themselves as much as to other people. And the version of Nick, her husband, in the book, I think is really interesting, because he genuinely seems to believe that he's trying to do the right, or he's trying to do right. Like, I feel like when he says that's the last affair, he believes it. He's like an addict. And he's like, oh, no more, or that was, he has a serious affair, and he lies and says, no, it was just a fling, but he's genuinely trying to keep this marriage together.
Yes, I think he's a bit more sympathetic in the comic.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
I think, well, there we go. Yes. In the comic, he's kind of like, he's quite a dashing kind of rogue.
Yeah.
But
he's more pathetic. He's like a pathetic... He can't stop having these affairs. His lies are, and we get his first person. We get his thoughts about these things, and he's like, I feel horrible for lying to her, and you believe that he feels horrible for lying to her.
Yes, yes. I mean, he is. All the characters are a bit I think all the characters are unlikable, really, in the comic,
except for Beth.
Except
I would say except for Beth.
It would be, you'd have to be a victim blamer to not like Beth.
Yeah, and Glenn, I think Glenn, the American academic who's trying to write this academic text, I'd
be a stretch to call him likable.
I don't know about likable. I think in the movie he's more. I quite liked him in the movie. Yeah.
The movie, yes. Well, the movie I think is less risk, takes fewer risks.
Right.
Very much wants you to like its characters a bit. Well, we can move on to a discussion of that now.
Okay,
I think the characters in the comic are a lot less likable. A lot more
What
satiric.
about Andy? Oh yeah, Andy.
Andy especially. I want to get into that. Yeah, especially Andy. Yeah. Okay. They are much more figures of ridicule than in the comic than they are figures deserving of our sympathy or admiration or interest. The way they are. Well, interest. I mean, it's good writing when you find a dislike an unlikable person interesting. And I think the comic has that. And
I really felt for Jodie, the teenager. I mean, I felt for Casey, her friend.
She's bad, but like she's a bad kid.
Yeah, she's a bad kid. But I'm like, man, I hope she sorts herself out. You know, like.
Yes, and it looked like she was sorting herself out. That's that.
Yeah.
But we'll get on to that. That's a risk that the film doesn't take, incidentally.
Right.
So, these characters, they're not likable. They're figures of ridicule. The film, on the other hand...
we'll start with an intro to the movie. So, 2010, directed by Stephen Frears, who is, a mega director. Directed Dangerous Liaisons, Grifters... Mary Riley, which is a movie I love that nobody else does because I think it's boring. High Fidelity. Mrs. Henderson Presents. The Queen. Philomena, Florence Foster Jenkins, Victoria and Abdul. Also a movie that I watched many, many times from before Dangerous Liaisons, Prick Up Your Ears, starring Gary Oldman and Alfred Molina.
Gary Oldman.
With Gary Oldman as Joe Orton, the playwright, who was killed by his lover, Alfred Molina. And that's an amazing movie.
I haven't seen it.
So it's I think it's like 82 or 4. It was like Gary Oldman did 2 in a row. He did like that one and then Sid and Nancy, and it was like, oh my god, this guy, who is this guy? But it's kind of
a Gary Oldman bell, Kumar.
Oh yeah, we did. Yeah. That it was a little bit under the radar. Anyway, but then Dangerous Liaisons, was a huge hit, and I think High Fidelity every 5 years. There's looking back at High Fidelity 15 years later, 20 years later, 25 years later. So initially I proposed this episode to Emmett to do on Deconstructing Comics when this podcast was just a twinkle in my eye. And Emmett replied, I hate that movie. And last week I emailed him and I said, oh, tell me why you hated it. And his thing was, here's where he effectively said, I'm going to summarize. He said that the male perspective suffocated the movie, and Drewe is the catalyst, but all the men hitting on her or lusting over her was the main concern. And he says that the put-on wife, meaning Beth, has nothing to do. Now, I'm kind of agree, disagree. I think Stephen Frears, some of them are about men lusting after women, and men behaving badly. And it's true in Dangerous Liaisons, and it's true in High Fidelity, which is maybe his second or most famous movie, which is about this guy that is a pig and just never learns. At the end of the movie, he hasn't grown up, really. Just like very marginally. But it's about that kind of person. So I think it's kind of about that kind of person. I think the difference is there's only one shot in the movie that I really felt was that kind of violated the premise of the comic.
Right, okay.
Specifically. So, in the comic, it's really interesting because the first day Tamara Drewe shows up, she shows up at the farm. She's wearing a t-shirt and these very short shorts. And in the comic, we get Beth's description of the way she looks, the way she acts. It's through Beth's perspective. In the movie, we get a male gaze. And it's maybe the only shot that's really like it in the movie, but she comes over the fence and we get a butt shot. Yeah. So we can see how short her shorts are. Yeah. So we don't get it from Beth's point of view.
And how that scene is. That's not her first scene in the movie because she has a scene in the pub before that.
Yes, so that's right.
Yeah, it's like her introduction scene in the comic, and it's and it does fit. It's odd in the context of the film because we have already been introduced to her,
right?
More than once, actually.
Yes.
In the pub and in her home when Glenn and Andy go over to find out why the alarm's going off.
Yeah.
So she has a conversation with them.
That's right.
I think we even see a flashback. And then she arrives in her Daisy Dukes and climbs the fences. Like,
some things are out of order, and I'm not sure why. Like Glenn overhearing about about Nick's affair with Nadia Patel in the toilet is placed differently and has a different effect.
Yes, this film made quite a few odd choices, but some of the choices make sense to make the characters more likable. And or to fit into certain archetypes better. Like Nicholas is like way sleazier and way less kind of like likable.
Oh yeah, he's a straight up like he's annoyed with his wife. He's like, this woman is driving me crazy. Kind of. He doesn't say that, but it's like you feel like he's so annoyed with her.
In the comic, he's a heel, but as you say, he as you say, he's kind of like. Hamstrung. He's like caught between these two things that he wants and doesn't know how to give either of them up.
Yes.
And in the film, he's much more of just like a heel. He's just like he's a scumbag because the film needs a villain.
And I think
and the comic doesn't have a villain. And I think it's a weakness. And I was talking before about Andy. We're going to get on to Andy. Andy in the comics is pathetic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. He asks Tamara, I think 3 times.
Yeah.
Date me. Please date me.
Right.
As far as like, no. Shove off. Right. Which is kind of like, I think, far from the madding crowd. Right. But in the film, we can't have that.
Okay, well, so the opening shot of the movie is a shirtless Luke Evans.
Yes, this is literally the first shot.
I should also mention, I only know Luke Evans from the Fast and Furious movies, because he's in like 3 of those.
I've never seen those movies.
But he comes in, he's like super handsome, he's got his shirt off, he's like sweating, he's cutting wood, firewood out in the farm, whatever.
He's our sexy leading man, so we can't have him pathetic and pining after Tamara Drewe.
No, and they've had a previous relationship, which I don't think was true.
He had a crush on her.
Right.
He had a crush on her when they were kids. She comes back, he asks her out something like 3 different times, and she turns him down each time. And like geez, man, that's pathetic.
Yeah.
But in the film, that not only is he way too cool to reconnect to do that, he never begs her to date him again. But he's also got like this hot Australian bartender that he's just casually nailing.
Yeah.
And that character is not in the comic.
Right.
And that character is literally just in the film, I think, so that Andy is more virile.
Right. Yeah.
I think she doesn't deliver much exposition. She's just there.
No, that's right.
She's just there
right.
So that he doesn't have. So he's not like impotent.
Yeah. So I did want to mention. So before we get even further into it, so the writer of this movie was someone named Moira Buffini. So I don't know who she is, except her only other credit that I recognized on IMDb was the Kari Joji Fukunaga version of Jane Eyre, which I wasn't a huge fan of. But so we've got a female writer on here. much like the comic, at least. And I loved the opening shot. We get the same classified ad on screen, and then we get a title card which says Summer, which is done in a kind of comic booky font. And I was like, okay, this is... I have seen this movie before, and I had read the comic before, but I hadn't remembered some of these little details. And I was like, oh, this is gonna be really cool. And then we get to see all the writers, and it's played for more obvious comedy than in the comic. And in fact, there's a really funny... One of these writers writes really over the top, like, I don't know, crime fiction. What does she call it? She calls it lesbian
crime.
Lesbian crime. But it's really like funny, bad, like crap writing.
Well, she publishes online, right?
She publishes online. That's right. On her blog or
posts
whatever.
on her blog or something.
Yeah. So there's
podcasting into the breeze.
Yeah. We're introduced to the teens very early, as opposed to the comic where we don't get to them really until several pages in. I can't remember how deep it was, which I thought was a good move, because I thought, considering how strongly they figure into the ending, the middle and the end of the comic, I thought, oh, it's good to place them that early. But then things play out differently.
Boy.
Beth is played by Tamsin Greig from Black Books.
It's hilarious.
Almost
and Friday Night Dinners as well.
Yeah, almost too good looking for the role. It seems like to be this. She's supposed to be like really dowdy. Anyway, we get Nadia Patel actually shows up as a character. She's just a voice on the phone, if that, in the comic.
I don't think she gets any dialogue. I think it's just Nicholas talking to her.
Yes. One of the teen girls actually helps at the farm. Which is a connection we don't have. So there's some connections here that
Andy
actually...
is her uncle. Her mother works at the farm.
Yeah.
She's serving canapes and things.
I actually kind of like...
It's either clever or it's just a way to get her in more shots.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I kind of like these connections. I like the way everything was being set up at the top. Right, so Beth finds out about the affair with Nadia, and it's the first affair he's ever had that she's discovered. And she's furious, and Beth is furious, and she throws him out. So this is very different from the comic where they've had this ongoing thing where she knows he has these he's
allowed to have his peccadillos as long as he's completely honest about them with her, except when he's not honest, but he's eventually honest. Right. And apparently that's the deal. He has his public ones and he has his private ones. It's all just very... But she's less of a victim in the comic.
Yeah.
Sort of has more agency. Whereas Andy has less agency in the comics.
Right.
It's just kind of a bit hapless. Although he does get the girl in the end, doesn't he? Yeah,
he does. Through... I don't know. We'll circle back around to that. We meet the drummer. Now, one thing I really like about the movie, and I noticed this the first time I went through these things 10 years ago or whatever it was, he looks like a real drummer in a real band. Whereas the guy in the comic just looks like a school dad. Like just this middle-aged dude or something. He doesn't look like a rocker. He looks just like a guy. He doesn't look that different from Nicholas.
It's true.
And Dominic Cooper, who's now done a bunch of Marvel stuff, or at least a few. Wasn't he Tony Stark's dad in some of those movies? He plays this drummer, and he actually plays the drums.
Yes.
And I thought he really looked the part, and he played the part more than I felt in the comic, where I was like, this guy doesn't seem like a musician to me.
Okay, that I didn't have that issue, but I can see that that's a point. He just does look kind of like a regular person.
Yeah.
He's got some tattoos. He's got some stubble.
Yes.
I mean,
right, yeah.
And
he wears makeup.
Like, he just looks like a regular guy.
Yeah.
He's not this obvious object of teenage lust.
Right.
That he is in the movie. Sure.
Yeah, and you can actually kind of see why that girl was crazy for him in the movie more than in the comic. In the comic, he's just a famous guy, so Jodie is crazy for him. He's a famous guy, and that's the reason. I also love that this whole.
Do you like people because they're good looking, or do you like them because they're famous? I think I didn't really have a problem that he looked just like a dad,
right?
Because he wasn't on stage; he was just in his
right.
in his civvies, right?
Right,
hanging out on the street with his girlfriend.
Yeah. Also, we get a crazy on stage scene
all the time. Oh yeah, I hated that. Like, the sound was all wrong. It didn't sound like live music.
I don't know. I like the fact that the whole band breakup happens live on stage, and he actually punches he leaves the drum kit and he charges the singer and attacks him on stage.
And then falls on. I didn't like it. And then falls on Tamara, and then she asks him in that.
Okay, yeah, that's yeah.
I didn't like that.
Okay.
I don't particularly like the actor for Tamara either. I don't particularly like her. In case it's not obvious at this point. Everyone, I didn't like this movie.
Okay.
I didn't like it. I didn't at all.
So Andy and Glenn, I found Glenn was a bit rounder.
Yes. Wait, you mean Greg? But is he Greg or Glenn?
Glenn. I thought it was Glenn, but maybe I think
it's Glenn, and okay. Greg might be what Nicholas calls him to get his.
Yes,
back.
You're right. You're 100% right.
Yes, it's Glenn. You're right. It's Glenn. It is Glenn, and I've been calling him Greg.
Okay, so it's Glenn.
Yeah, he's Glenn. You're right.
So.
He's more, I don't think he gains a lot by being more well-rounded. Like, it just feels a bit contrived.
And they bring in his attraction to Beth. They have a kiss.
Yeah. Well, they have. It's like a story that's going on. Like, we're supposed to root for him to get with Beth, and because he's clearly pining for her, right. And we know she shouldn't be with that ratbag, Nicholas, because he's such a sleaze. And I feel like this isn't what the comic's about at all. This is not what.
Yeah.
It's not about.
She doesn't hook up with, in the comic, she doesn't hook up
with... out the bad man and seeing the hapless, like the good bloke that's been holding a torch for her all along. Like, that's not what. I didn't like it. I think it's just taking refuge in kind of like easy, very kind of like trope-driven storytelling.
I think you're...
Look, I'm
right.
But I just saw it making easy choices.
Yeah.
Like Jodie, and like let's jump to the end. Jodie, obviously, as you pointed out earlier, dies in the comic.
Yeah. So she
she
pulls a scam. She sneaks into Tamara's house, uses Tamara's email, and emails Ben after they've broken up. Because he's got this dog and he's going overseas. He needs someone to look after the dog. And she emails and says, I have this friend Jodie and she'll look after your dog. Phone her directly. So he comes to town and she meets him. And
that's what happens in the movie. He phones her and says, I'll meet you at the house.
Right.
And then she goes to the house and meets him.
Yeah.
And it's all and then she gets a call from her friend who's out chasing his dog.
Yeah. And
her friend's desperately trying to call her to say, he's here, don't go near the house because he's here. And that's straight from the comic. But it doesn't make any sense because she knows he's there. She's going to the house because he asked her to meet him.
Casey doesn't know that they're meeting.
But it's a story beat. It's a thing from the comic because in the comic, Ben hides in the house. He doesn't show up to their meeting.
Yeah.
And he waits in the house for her to show up in the house and incriminate herself.
I'll tell you what a more dramatic change for me was that in the movie, he's like, you're going to do what I tell you. And she's like, she's like, she's been caught red-handed. She's like, oh, I'm so sorry. He's like, you're going to do it. And then we have another scene and then we cut back and she's making him tea exactly the way he likes it. In the comic,
you're going to do for me what my good little fans do for me.
In the comic, we don't know if something nefarious has happened until we learn later that nothing bad did happen. But we're left with this sinking feeling that he has assaulted her.
Yeah, he seems kind of menacing. They try to make it menacing, but the bloke's like 5'0" nothing. He's not menacing at all. But in the comic, as you say, he's quite menacing, but he also says, I figured, I know what's going on.
Yeah.
I figured it out, and that's why I waited for you here, so that you could literally incriminate yourself by breaking into the house again and putting on Tamara's clothes. But and he's sort of looming over her. But then I thought he kind of turns around and seems kind of the moral person in the situation, because he makes her promise not to break in again, and
right.
And he sort of gets her to have a good, sort of like a hard look at herself and realize that she shouldn't be doing that kind of thing. And then later on, she tells her friend that he gave her a CD, a limited edition CD, and he even kissed her on the cheek.
Yeah.
And everything's looking up. And then to celebrate, she goes and huffs computer cleaner.
Yeah.
To celebrate, because it was such a great day. She met her idol, and he was a human being that, and gave her a CD and a decent bloke, and he talked her into being better, and she dies of an overdose.
Yeah.
Celebrating. It's just so rough.
Yeah, very rough. And at the same moment almost, Nicholas dies trampled by cows in a field.
We don't even know. He's just, there's that panel where it's just, we don't even know it's Nicholas.
No, that's right.
It's just the body in the field.
Yeah.
Because the cows have been riled up by the...
We see him go out into the field, and he looks at something. We don't know what he's looking at, and then we cut away, and then the next time we see, he's like face down in the dirt, I think.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly it.
Later we learn that he had gotten into a tussle with Glenn, and Glenn had pushed him, and he'd hit his head, and Glenn had run away.
Yep.
And then Nicholas was too stunned to get out of the way of the cows that were spooked by the dog that was chasing them around, and they trampled him to death. Now, again, this is done out of order. We actually see the tussle when it happens. We don't get it as a flashback in the movie.
No, it happens. And then we get a scene where Beth finds his body and is really distraught. And then she punches Tamara in the nose and breaks it.
Yeah, okay, so I like that touch. I think that was I actually like the nose breaking. I like her grief in the field. We don't get that in the comic.
No. Instead, we get that scene where the three of them, Jodie's friend, Tamara, and Beth, sit around the table and share a cigarette.
Yeah.
And I liked that scene.
Yeah.
I didn't really like the grief scene in the movie. I couldn't tell you precisely why.
Okay.
Maybe I think it was a bit over the top, perhaps.
Well, the owner of the cows shoots the dog. So that's that's the substitute. And
Jodie lives and the dog dies, and I'm just forced to think that the writer really wanted you to like this movie and to like these characters, and didn't think you could handle the teenage girl dying at the end.
Considering it's a more comedic tone, I don't think it could have done the death at the end. The way it plays out, it's because it's more comedic than, it's not a comedy of manners per se. It's like a comedy.
It's just more a straight comedy. Yeah, you're right. And I think those changes are to the detriment.
And also, I mean, Nick is a guy that the way he's portrayed in the movie, because he's such a grade A jerk, you don't really mind.
No, you're quite happy he's run over
that
by
this
the
fictional
cow.
character is dead.
No,
whereas
it's what he deserved. He deserved to get run over by cows.
Yeah. Whereas in the comic, it's not that clear cut. It's like
it's not.
He was self-deluded. Also, in the comic, I think Beth finds out about the affair with Tamara, and that causes Nick at a festival to announce that he's going to stop writing these Inchcombe novels, this series of 20 mystery novels. In the movie, he announces that he's stopping, but we don't know why.
And it doesn't make sense. No, you're right. And that's such a strange choice. You're right, because in the comic, this Beth shows up at his interview or public reading or what have you, where
panel,
he takes questions from the audience. His panel, of course, that's the word. And says, "Why do you write it? Do you write about adultery so much because you're an adulterer?"
Yeah.
And he knows it's her, and kind of says, "Well, what a saucy question, madam."
He doesn't know it's her until she stands up.
I think that's in the movie. I felt like in the comic, he's sort of...
Yes, in the comic, yeah.
in the comic he knows, and he's just like he's messing with her almost, playing like fencing, like verbally fencing, saying, "Oh, I'm going to stop riding Inchcombe because." Who
does he say? Why did you? Somebody says, "Why did you cheat on your wife?" And he says, "Because she lets me." Who did he say that to? Did he say that to?
He says
Glenn?
He says that to
or Andy.
To her. He says it to her because she asks a second.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
She says, "Why do you?"
Oh, he says it to her.
Your
to her
wife so much.
Yeah.
Why do you cheat on your wife so much? He goes, "Because she lets me." And that was, I thought, it's such a cad. It's such a terrible.
It's like, actually the way he delivers it, the way the actor delivers it, I actually feel that's the one line that was more.
Yeah, I liked that.
Like there was sadness in it. Like
I did like that part.
A bit
that was
more
one
like
of his better lines. He did have a few funny lines, and that was one of the better ones.
Yeah.
But of course, in the comic, well, how I read it was that he was fencing with her, and he said he was killing off Inchcombe because she named. Because there's an understanding it's mentioned in the film, but it's I think more explicit in the comic that she's a co-contributor.
Yes.
To the Inchcombe books.
Yeah.
And they're as much hers as they are his.
Right.
And he's saying, I'm gonna kill off this character, the character that you helped me create, the character you named. You're gonna come and embarrass me at the panel.
What? Wait, was this?
Is what I'm gonna say.
The comic wasn't it? Okay.
In the comic, this is his repartee he's having with her after she confronts him.
Right, but in the comic, isn't he canceling the series to be more in the present with his wife? Wasn't he trying to make amends? Wasn't that the purpose of killing off Inchcombe?
I didn't get that impression.
Okay, I might have misread it, or maybe I'm just not remembering.
You might be right. We have okay. That's just another perspective. My perspective was that he was, as I say, messing with her.
Okay.
Like, yeah. There was some symbolism there because she created the character. So he was saying.
And also in the comic, so Tamara and Beth are both at this panel, and one of them is not supposed to actually be there. And I think in the comic, Beth was supposed to be there, and then Tamara just decided to show up.
I think it might be the other way around.
Other way around. So it's the same in the movie.
I'm not sure. In the movie, they're both there. And then
but she shows up. That's why he doesn't know she's in the audience and is the one asking the question. He doesn't know that Beth was...
Tamara is in the audience. I'm just looking at it now.
Yeah.
And then Beth... Yeah, then Beth asks the question.
Right.
Yep. And then another person just goes back to a normal question and says, when can we expect a new Dr. Inchcombe? And he goes, well, never, I hope. I think it's time for him to call it a day. Enough's enough, because, well, I'm afraid I'm sick to death of him. Sorry, folks.
Yeah, we've never had any inkling of this in the movie before, that he was considering cancelling the series or anything.
Yeah, that's right. And it comes before the confrontation with Beth, and it doesn't make any sense why he would say that. No sense. It doesn't make any sense. It's just another bizarre choice the film makes.
Yes.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Okay, so at the end of the comic, Andy and Tamara end up getting married, and Tamara ends up pregnant. She was like the type that was not going to have kids before that. And her relationship with No,
they don't get married. They're just.
Oh, sorry, they're not married, but they're together, and she's pregnant with with Andy's kid.
She had the baby, I think. Yeah.
Oh, right.
The last the next to last page has Andy carrying the baby in one of those baby carrying things, because he's such a. Because he's so. Of course, he's carrying the baby.
Yeah. Do they do end up together in the? Do we get it 1 year later in the movie?
Oh, perhaps. Or maybe I stopped it when the credits were running. Maybe there's an after credits scene.
No, there's nothing after the credits.
They just, and it's like, he's just been there all along, ruggedly handsome, and she just realizes that he's the one.
He's the one.
The one all along. It was you all along. Yeah. Oh, it's just so sad. I didn't approve of it. And yeah. Oh well, Oh well.
Okay. Okay. Let's wrap it up. So comic.
Let's do our answers and so on.
Yeah. Comic.
The questions and answers.
Yeah. Comic, yay or nay?
That's a yay. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's different to what I'd read before. I can recommend it.
Okay. I did
don't normally read a comic that doesn't have like lasers or people flying around. It's like, that's why. But there are other reasons why people might use this medium, and to tell a story like this is one of those reasons. So yeah, I can recommend it.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's really a pretty great read too, and I am remembering the really funny stuff, like when Tamara has this relationship with Nicholas. They have such elaborate codes and things for meeting and stuff, and all that stuff is really funny. And
she puts a lamp in the window.
Yeah.
And then they write chalk on the letterbox.
And you're really right. Like she just enters these relationships because she feels like it. She's with Ben because she feels like it. She's with Nicholas because she feels like it. It's not because she's on a rebound or something.
Yeah. The film goes all this effort to explain why she does it.
Yeah.
And they showed that she had a crush on Nicholas when she was a teenager in the film.
Yeah, right.
We see a flashback where she's trying to seduce him in a kind of ham-fistedly teenage way.
Yeah.
Like, why is this here?
Yeah.
To make it explicable why a hot young girl would want to hook up with this gross old dude.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah. Okay, well, I'll ask you one now. The film, Kumar, yay or nay?
Okay, so I actually... despite the plot holes that we've picked out, like things happening out of sequence that don't make sense, I actually, without having read the comic, I do remember quite liking it the first time. But looking at it now, I'm going to say nay. I'm going to say go watch Prick Up Your Ears and Dangerous Liaisons and High Fidelity.
Good.
And I'm going to say this one is skippable.
Yeah, I'm also... I mean, if it's not clear by now, it's nay for me too. Although maybe because I read the comic first and then...
I don't remember. I'm trying to remember what order I actually watched them in that first time, like 10 years ago. And I can't.
And what about as an adaptation?
I'm going to say... nay. And I think it started out so promising, and it's actually really... You know what? It's really close to the comic, except for the stuff that they messed up. But I think the ending is... I think to kill the dog and not kill Jody is such a weird...
So weird.
It's so off for me.
Well, Kumar, I feel like the fact that it's so close to the comic makes these differences all the more jarring.
You're right.
And bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the changes just like I couldn't imagine why they made that choice, and some of them I think they did because they wanted it to be more of a comedy, or they wanted the characters to be more. They wanted you to like the characters a bit better.
Yeah.
So yes, so that's a nay.
Yeah, I'm going to say nay as well. So it's going to be yay, nay, nay. I think we're agreed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yay, nay, nay. Yeah, very good, very good.
Okay, next week we are going to talk about Marjane Satrapi's Prosepolis.
Right. I've read that one before, but I haven't seen the film, so I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, okay, excellent. I think I won't spoil how I feel about both of those things.
Oh God, don't start talking about it now. We're going to talk about it for an hour next week.
Okay, excellent.
All right.